It was the season's last masquerade ball in the Opera House before Lent, Friday the 16th of March, 1792. It was the last chance to strike. The conspirators had already made several attempts, but always had to abort at the last minute. Now it had to happen. The king had to die. Anckarström will do it, the conspirators had decided. Jacob Johan Anckarström, born May 11, 1762, was a Swedish nobleman and military officer, best known for assassinating King Gustav III of Sweden during a masquerade ball at the Opera House in Stockholm in 1792. Anckarström was a wealthy yet ascetic man who made a living by lending money at good interest rates. He was considered good-looking, small in stature, tough, and determined. He hated many and much of his time, but most of all he hated Gustav III. Most of what Anckarström had done in life had failed. He owned a few farms in Vallentuna, but was in conflict with his neighbors, lawsuits that had cost him dearly. He hated the king for his economic policies, the failed war, and much more. Moreover, Anckarström had been drawn into a high-profile trial, accused of insulting the king, a crime that could lead to execution in the worst case. Therefore, he hated the king even more. For 3 years, the conspiracy against the king had been ongoing. Gustav III's reforms had taken power from the nobility and elevated the middle class. His war against Russia had cost over 20,000 soldiers' lives, but had not provided any advantage. There were some noblemen who just wanted a political revolution, but all wanted to regain the nobility's rights. Today, historians know that there were over 150 people who participated in the conspiracy in various ways. Gustav III himself knew what was happening, as did Police Chief Lilian Spar. The masquerade ball was to begin at 10:30 in the evening. The conspirators would all wear white masks and black dominoes with hoods, the latest fashion in masquerade attire from Venice. The spider in the web, the brain that planned the great conspiracy and what would happen to Sweden when the king was dead, was the 72-year-old General Carl Fredrik Peklin. He had been on or close to the political scene in Sweden during every political crisis in the past 50 years. Peklin was a wealthy man who lived in a large house on Blasieholmen near today's National Museum. With great finesse and knowledge of people, he had selected the core group of conspirators and determined their roles, and he had a clear plan for what would happen next. Sweden would have a new constitution. He had chosen the new ministers. Everyone knew what they were to do and what was expected of them. The conspirators hated the king for various reasons. Some were passionate idealists, influenced by the French and American revolutions. Others were hardened egoists who felt bypassed in their careers. The leaders closest to Peklin were Count Klaus Horn and Adolf Ribbing. Anckarström was not interested in the political discussions. He just wanted to know when and where he was to shoot the king. He borrowed pistols from Horn. On Friday, March 16, 1792, the people of Stockholm woke up to a light blanket of snow over the city. Out at Haga, Gustav III took a short walk, then traveled by sleigh to Stalmistargården, where there was to be a sleigh race on Brunnsviken. Many Stockholmers prepared themselves for the evening's ball. One of them, who was involved in the conspiracy and had an important task now that the king was dead, was Lieutenant Colonel Carl Pontus Liljehorn. He lived in the house next to the opera. He knew that there was now no turning back. The king was to be murdered. But Liljehorn began to get scared. He could not betray his comrades, but he could perhaps prevent the king from attending the ball. Carl Pontus Liljehorn got cold feet and tried to warn the king, but in vain. He wrote a long anonymous letter in which he claimed to be a courtier with knowledge of what was going to happen. He warned of horrible, extremely repulsive things that he had heard rumors about happening during the evening. The masquerade ball was held inside the Opera House's auditorium, on the stage. The musicians were also dressed in dominoes. They sat on a platform on the stage. The first ball guests, or masks as they are called at a masquerade, began to arrive around 10 o'clock. The sharp-eyed could see that some guests arrived dressed in exactly the same black dominoes and white masks for the face. They all had identical, straight black boots. Anckarström loaded the pistols with 6 coarse shots, 6 broken-off wallpaper knobs, and 2 lead balls wrapped in paper so that they would seal tightly in the barrel. He took out the knife and his own saber. Then he and Horn left together around 11:30. Most Stockholmers were asleep at this time. Many bars were open. Inside, there were plenty of people talking in hushed voices. They were all waiting for the signal that the uprising had begun. Many knew that tonight was the night. One sled after another arrived at the illuminated opera house. Out stepped shepherdesses, caliphs, peasants and knights, harlequins and pierrots. Curious people stood gaping in the street outside. Then the king arrived with his entourage. He stepped out, wearing a jacket of marled gray silk, knit with a wide belt of the same fabric. On his chest, one could see an embroidered seraphim cravat and the Order of the Sword. The shirt had lace at the neck and wrists. The royal party went straight up to the king's room on the 3rd floor and sat down at the table. The king had Master of the Horse Hans Henrik von Essen at his right side. 5 other gentlemen were invited, no ladies. When the supper was almost over, the king received the anonymous warning letter. He tore it open and began to read. As the party broke up, the king showed the letter to von Essen, who became very upset. The king just laughed and said, "Shall they think I am afraid?" The king demonstratively stood in the round window called the ox eye, where he could be seen well from the stage and the auditorium. He could see a group of black dominoes with white masks and round hats, hurrying across the stage, gathering below the window and looking up at him. They held each other by the arms. Anckarström stood among them. He had one pistol inside his domino, the other in his back pocket. The knife was tucked into his belt. Now would have been the opportunity to shoot. "Come, let's go down. The masquerade seems joyful and pleasant," said the king. Von Essen tried to persuade Gustav to surround himself with a protective guard. The king laughed off all warnings. We do not know if Gustav III consciously walked into mortal danger because he wanted to die, or if he just wanted to challenge his enemies in a titillating game. In the vicinity of death, the sensation of life is strongest, as he himself had experienced several times during the Russian War. We only know that he, despite all warnings and against common sense, went down to the enemy that he knew was waiting for him. The orchestra played the first minuet. Gustav slowly walked a full lap around the stage and began a new lap when he entered the left side of the stage. The orchestra played a quadrille. Ribbing immediately recognized the king and signaled the conspirators. Horn and several others followed Ribbing. The king returns from the foyer. Anckarström sees the king coming surrounded by masked guests. He pushes through the crowd and gets as close as possible. In his left hand, he holds the knife. With his right hand, he pulls out the pistol. The hammer is already cocked. He aims at the king's back. "Bonsoir, bon masque. Good evening, beautiful mask," says one of the conspirators, placing his hand on the king's shoulder. The idea was that he would turn around. He doesn't. Anckarström becomes a bit unsure. Just then, the king turns slightly to the left to say something. Anckarström fires the pistol, and the king flinches. The bullet enters just below the fabric belt at his waist. The sound is insignificant. Most people notice nothing. Aïe, je suis blessé. Ah, I am wounded. The king touches his back with his hand. He doesn't fall or faint. Von Essen drags the king to the stone bench under the ox-eye window. Anckarström sees that the king can still walk. He grabs the knife but dares not rush forward. He has failed, once again. He lets the other pistol slide to the floor. Then the knife. He pushes himself among the masks and shouts, "Fire is loose!" The other black dominoes join in. The panic they had planned did not occur. The audience murmurs, and the orchestra continues to play. An officer who understood what had happened shouts with his loudest command voice, "Close all doors and let no one out. The king is wounded." The cry, "Fire is loose," was the signal. A young boy guarding the doors heard the cry and ran as fast as he could to Peklin, who understood. Anckarström had shot. Peklin awaited the next step. Now the signal for the general march would come, and the revolution would begin. But nothing happened. Gustav III sat dazed on the bench for a moment, blood seeping from the wound. Supported by von Essen's arm, he slowly walked up to his quarters and lay down on the red couch. Distraught courtiers and pages ran back and forth, the only calm one being the king. He gave clear orders and directives. The king's brother, Duke Karl, must be informed. The court physician was summoned. Police Chief Liljenspara must be called. All Stockholm customs were closed. No one was allowed to enter, and no one was allowed to leave the city. Police Chief Liljenspara takes command. He positions himself at a table on the stage. A general unmasking is ordered. All guests must pass one by one, state their name and address, and then they are allowed to go home. In a very short time, Lilian Spara had received a series of detailed reports about men in black dominoes and white masks. 2 pistols and a knife were found on the floor. The king was taken to the castle and laid in the grand state bedchamber. A large crowd of courtiers and curious onlookers pressed into the castle, all the way into the bedchamber. In front of everyone, the king was undressed and put to bed, all while smiling kindly and scattering witty comments around him. Gustav underwent a first bloodletting at 4 in the morning, and the doctors found some nails in the wound. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Lilian Spar had found a gunsmith who could identify the pistols. Captain Anckarström had turned them in. At the castle, the doctors continued to work on the already inflamed wound, which must have been very painful without anesthesia. That same morning, Lilian Spar announced that the murderer had been found. His name was Anckarström. He was arrested. He was interrogated, confessed, and said that he acted alone and felt no remorse, quite the opposite. Horn was then arrested, as he had been seen arriving at the masquerade with Anckarström. Horn happened to mention Ribbing's name, and he was also arrested. Several others who seemed to have been present were arrested. Pecklin was arrested, but he was the hardest to crack. Nothing affected him. His treatment could be called advanced psychological torture, but he did not budge an inch. He knew nothing about anything. Gustav's death struggle at the castle lasted for 13 days. On Thursday, March 29th, Gustav III was half-seated in bed with a peaceful expression on his face. "He's sleeping," said Armfeldt, who had been with the king almost the entire time. "Yes," replied the personal physician, "the eternal sleep." Gustav's brother, Duke Karl, took over in a new regency government. Gustav's close friends and associates were persecuted. Only one of the conspirators was executed, Anckarström. All others had their punishments lessened by Duke Karl, who had a list of more than 150 people who all knew that the murder would take place. Duke Karl declared that the investigations would cease. Pecklin, who revealed nothing, was taken to Marstrand Fortress, where he lived quite comfortably until he died a natural death. It is likely that Duke Karl also knew what was going to happen. He had forbidden his wife, Elizabeth Charlotta, to attend the ball, and despite it being very late in the evening, he sat fully dressed, waiting when the news of the assassination attempt came. He knew that now it was his turn to step forward. And that brings us to the end of the story of Jacob Johan Anckarström and the murder of King Gustav III. If you liked what you saw, please give this video a thumbs up, and be sure to subscribe for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.